City on the Irtysh appeared in 1718, then Semipalatinsk, and today Semey. Just recently, it celebrated its 300th anniversary. Due to its location at the crossroads of major trade routes, after its foundation, it almost immediately became an important military and commercial point between the Russian Empire, Central Asia, and Western China. Semey grew and changed. The old merchant houses disappeared from the face of the earth, freeing up space for factories and residential areas. But to this day in Semey, many buildings have been preserved, which can rightly be considered prominent monuments of bygone times. However, let us begin the story about the architecture of Semey and about a structure that appeared less than 20 years ago, but almost immediately after the commissioning has become a hallmark of the city.
I have been here for a long time, and what I have seen basically is this bridge, which is the copy of San Francisco Bridge somewhere, and it's about a kilometer or more than a kilometer long. This, what I have been using since my second course, it is for jogging, and something what I like is this bridge, because you can just be alone, get your time here and go for a jog. That will give you a hype in your energy and all, like. And not this bridge, like it's one of the most longest bridge I can say, and it has like the 7th place in the world. And how long I can say. There are like 2-3 more bridges in Semey, and one of the best architecture what I have felt yet.
The suspension bridge across the Irtysh was opened in 2001, and today from whatever side you drive up to Semey, the first thing that catches your eye is its footings, towering over the Irtysh by 19.5 meters. And this is not surprising. The dimensions of the bridge itself are truly impressive. The length of the bridge is 1,086 meters, 1/3 of which is occupied by the main span. On the 35-meter width, there are 6 lanes for road transport and 2 footpaths. It is a relatively new, recently built according to the Japanese project, bridge. It is really an ornament of our city. Pavel Zhukov, one of the creators of the Irtysh Regional Society, author of 15 monographs on Semipalatinsk. In total, there are 4 bridges in Semey. In addition to the suspension bridge, which is called new in the city, there is also a railway and auto bridge. Its nickname is Old, as well as a Truss Bridge leading to Polovnichi Island, recently renamed Bibichalik. A supra-story is connected to the construction of each of them, but in practice, the goal of their construction always came down to one thing: to connect the left and right banks of the Irtysh. Since the founding of the city, the issue of crossing to the left bank has been very acute. If in the summer it was relatively possible, there were boat crossings, the ferry plane was operating, by the way, very interesting construction. In winter, or rather in the mid-season, spring and summer, it was a big problem. Due to the fact that it was a border town, it flourished. Naturally, in order to trade with the steppe, it was necessary to cross to the left bank somehow. And here this problem was solved in different ways. Originally, these were ferry crossings. Mikhail Situda, teacher of the highest category, author of 23 monographs about Semipalatinsk. It seems that at all times the residents of this places differed from others with their grand thinking. This was due to the favorable geographical location. The other local bridge, Railroad Bridge, was considered the largest structure of the Turkestan-Siberian Railway at the time of construction in the 1930s. Workers from all over the country manually erected a roadbed for construction, giving it the correct design forms. At the time of construction, a temporary wooden bridge over the Irtysh was erected to deliver goods for 11 days. Carefully designed span structures, the main supporting structure with a length of almost 110 meters. The opening of the bridge in 1929 truly became an event of historic importance. The Irtysh Bridge is the largest construction of the Turkestan-Siberia Railway, wrote all Union newspapers. The long-held dream of uniting Siberia with the cotton belt of Central Asia and the border region of China's Xinjiang province is being realized in the shortest way. In addition to the fact that the bridge has become and still remains one of the most important sections of Turksib, of course, it also played an enormous role in the life of the city. The problem of the permanent connection of the two banks with its construction was solved for centuries. It was opened in 1929 on May 1st. It was assumed that there will be both railway traffic and foot traffic, but then the project was slightly modified. Only railway traffic remained. And people got to the left bank, and from the left to the right, with the help of the so-called labor train. The next step was the opening of a truss bridge crossing the Irtysh's tributary Semipalatinsk in 1955. The name of the bridge was chosen thanks to its iron structures, which are commonly called trusses. The bridge connected the right bank of the city with the island of Kirov. That is how it was called back then. And from there to the left bank, Semey, a pontoon bridge was installed for the spring and autumn period. This was structures with floating supports, commonly called pontoons. In the city, there is a legend that this bridge was brought from Germany after the end of the Second World War as a trophy. It is impossible to exclude the version that the bridge was taken as a trophy, but I do not believe it because there is no evidence for this. If the trusses of the bridge to Polovnichi Island were taken out of Germany, at least there should be a trademark, crop, for example, crop metal, but there are no such signs. However, there is every reason for the appearance of such a legend. Consider opponents. When the project of the bridge over the Irtysh was being developed, this particular place was chosen for the construction of the bridge, and it was assumed that the bridge would have two sections: permanent, capital, through Semipalatinsk, and the floating bridge, pontoon, across the main channel of the Irtysh. It was this pontoon bridge that was brought from Germany and served for a long time, until finally, due to normal wear and tear, it was eliminated.
И послужил достаточно долго, пока, наконец, вследствие естественного износа не был ликвидирован.
Nine years later, in 1964, a third automobile bridge appears in Semey. It was a typical project of those times. For example, in neighboring Oskimen, at about the same time, its twin brother was erected. It was then that the connection of the two banks of Semipalatinsk becomes uninterrupted. In addition, a few years later, between the Auto Bridge and Kirov bridges on the bank of the Semipalatinsk, construction of the embankment begins.
Вот кто начал строить вот эту всю красоту? Вот, знаете, интересно, что как-то не говорят об этом, не помнят сейчас. А ведь это нужно помнить. И вот мне хочется
Who started to build this beauty? You know, it's interesting that somehow they don't talk about it. They don't remember now. But this must be remembered. And today I want to pay tribute to a person who has invested a lot in our city, not only in its improvement, but also in its cultural development. This is Ulyanov Nikolai. He was the first secretary of the city party committee, and he is the first who returned to the Leningrad architects and asked to develop a comprehensive plan for the embankment. And when he was the head of the city during this period, that the construction of the embankment really began.
Когда он управлял городом, именно в тот период начинается действительно строительство набережной.
Built in the 1970s of the last century, the embankment was repaired several times. The last reconstruction took place here in 2016. And all this time, it was and still remains one of the favorite places of rest, both for residents of Semey and for guests of the city.
The good thing about the riverside is that, first of all, it's green and it's neat as well. Plus, you can come here for your free time, for the time when you need to relax. You need you need some alone time as well. Plus, it's really good for picnics as well. And I guess really good for photography as well. You can come here, take photos, get that Instagram mode on. And what else? Well, other than that, it's good. It's really good during the summers. For the winters as well, you can get a scenery here as well. Well, other than that, you can get fishing. And there's parks over here as well. You can come here with your family, have a family time. And other than that, during the summers and the evenings, there's a lot of canvas here as well.
Literally a few meters above the embankment, there is an object that refers us to more ancient times. At the same time, it is of tremendous value, both historical and architectural, and which is no less important, economic. The first water supply system in Kazakhstan was built in Semipalatinsk at the beginning of the 20th century. So this building was built in 1910. And when they talk about this building, for some reason they always say that it was built at the expense of the merchant Pleshev Prokopy. But in fact, the building and the water supply system in general was built not at the expense of the merchant Pleshev, but at the expense of the state budget, the city budget. Simply, Pleshev made considerable efforts to ensure that this water supply system could be built. And it was built. Here, of course, one cannot forget that in addition to Pleshev and other merchants, they took part in the construction of the aqueduct and the construction of this pumping station, including Moskvin, who also was the head of the city once, like Pleshev Prokopy. For service on the construction of the city water supply, a specialist from Moscow, Dmitry Yeliseyev, was invited. The budget of the entire project amounted to a huge sum for those times, more than 200,000 rubles. By approximate calculations, today it is about $2 million. A tenth of the estimate was spent on the construction of the building of the pumping station. They chose a place near the coast for the sake of an important object. They even had to demolish the city administration building. And in 1911, it was here that the first water supply system began to work on the territory of modern Kazakhstan. The pumping station has been functioning until now, almost 110 years old, and many residents of Semey, not without reason, call it the pumping station of the merchant Prokopy Pleshev. He invested a huge amount of his personal funds there, with the only condition: when the water supply will be built, connect his wife's house after his death to this water supply. By the way, an interesting detail is that at the meeting of the City Duma, decision, how it is directly stated in the protocol, was welcomed by everyone standing up. Not far from the water tower, also on the bank of Semipalatinsk, there is another architectural monument of Semey, the steam mill of Muhsin brothers. Built in 1900s, the building of the time was considered the latest technology. You can't say that it was Muhsin mill because it was the mill of the Muhsin brothers. The Muhsin brothers, both Latif and Fatih, died before the revolution. One was 50 years old when he died, another 54. One died due to some infectious disease. The second died from the same infection. Unlike their father and grandfather, they did not live long, but at least the family left a mark on the history of the city. Not only this monument here. Well, the monument, it is an industrial building. It was essentially always used as an industrial building. But in addition, they invested a lot of money in the opening of the first newspapers in Semipalatinsk, the first plumbing system. They invested their own money. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Muhsin family was one of the 100 richest people in Russia. These were millionaires, dollar millionaires, not the ruble, but dollar millionaires. Engineers from Germany and America were hired to build the first steam mill in the city. On the foundation stone, the highest building of those times was rebuilt of ruble stone, more than 10 meters. It was visible from any point of the city, which consisted of mostly one-story buildings back then. With the introduction of the mill, wheat is brought there from Siberia and Altai. After processing the flour of the highest quality, it was sent in different directions throughout the Russian Empire: Pavlodar, Omsk, Tyumen, Perm, Tobolsk, and St. Petersburg. It is noteworthy that, as in the case of the pumping station, the building is still used for its intended purposes. Since the Second World War, there is a hardware feeding factory in it.
Она в очень хорошем состоянии, несмотря на то, что достаточно долгое время там был и продолжает метизно-фурнитурный завод.
It's in a very good condition, despite the fact that for quite a long time there was and continues to be a hardware and accessories factory. And this press with a powerful load, it endured everything. It's a very interesting object. If you pay attention to the gable facing the side of the bridge, there is a round hole that looks like a dormer window. In this dormer window, there was a clock, one of the few large clocks. But after the fire of 1918, when the grain warehouse was burned, at the threat of the capture of the city by the White Guards, this clock was destroyed. Where did it go? I don't know. Now we're trying to figure out its fate, but it would be interesting to restore them. In general, this building is very interesting. I believe that any old buildings should be restored to their original appearance, at least outside. Inside it can be as you please, the owner can rebuild it, but the appearance should be maintained. This is the highlight that distinguishes any city, any settlement from the rest.
Надо восстанавливать в их первозданном облике, хотя бы снаружи. Внутри может быть как угодно хозяева перестраивать, но внешний облик должен сохраняться. Это та изюминка, которая выделяет любой город, любой населенный пункт из общей массы.
One of these highlights, emitting the look of Semipalatinsk, can be called a fire tower. This is a sample of stone architecture of the early 20th century. It is the only one in Kazakhstan that was preserved in its original form for 92 years. Its predecessor was a wooden tower built in the 19th century. In a city where most of the houses were built from a log house, the problem of fires was very acute. The buildings were located fairly close to each other, and frequent fires destroyed the buildings. For example, a major fire in 1790 leveled almost all the fortifications.
В 1867 году была построена первая.
In 1867, the first fire tower was built in our city. It allowed to observe the entire city. Since it was wooden, the firemen made notches on the railing, and it was clear that if the smoke comes, for example, from the southwest, it means that the Muhsin mill is burning. That is, they even made notes on the notches.
Подписывали вот эти зарубки.
The construction of this fire station with the tower was started in 1923 and was completed 4 years later. The construction was carried out by the firefighters themselves. At this time, a special mode of operation was introduced for the firefighters: 2 shifts in a row, then a day of rest and a day of work at the construction site of the fire station.
Инициатором был начальник пожарного подразделения Викентий Викентьевич Миштофт.
The initiator was the head of the fire department, Vikenty Miktoft. He asked his friend Ivan Bogomolov, who was the architect of our city, to plan a fire station. He planned it not according to the golden section. Because of this, the architect had problems. Why? Because when everything was already built, when you stand on the place where there is a Abaya museum, it seemed across the road that the tower is falling.
Музей Абая, то через дорогу казалось, что каланча падает.
The project of a 2-story building provided for those days a full range of basic and auxiliary premises for the fire brigade. In the depot building, in addition to the garage with 5 gates for exit, there were rooms for various services. There are also 2 towers. One is intended for observation of the terrain, the other is for drying fire pipes, so-called hoses. This tower is often not perceived as such, since it is hidden behind the tower. But at the same time, to this day, the fire hose tower regularly performs its function.
На саму каланчу, она начиналась со 2-го этажа здания, ведет ровно 100 ступенек, 60 железобетонных.
It started from the 2nd floor of the building, exactly 100 steps, 60 reinforced concrete and 40 steep spiral staircases. Was it an idea of the architect or not is unknown. In order to climb the fire tower, you need to do 7 laps. It is wonderful, and the newlyweds had a feeling that they rose to the 7th heaven and got married in heaven. This is wonderful. At the tower in 2016, we'll put a fireman dummy, which still faithfully serves guarding our city. By the way, we had a little less fires since then. Perhaps he helps us.
Возможно, он нам помогает.
The building of the Women's Gymnasium and subsequently the Veterinary Institute of Semipalatinsk experienced the cunning of the fire element. It had to go through 2 large fires. In both cases, the cause of a fire was the failure to observe basic safety rules. The fires began almost on the same day with a difference of almost 70 years. The center fire was the assembly hall, and even the fire path did not change either. During extinguishing, the same problem arose: lack of water in the water supply networks.
Она, во-первых, внешний вид-то изменила по сравнению с первозданным. Дело в том, что женская гимназия вообще была...
First of all, it has changed the appearance in comparison with the primary one. It was actually a 2-story building. The 3rd floor was added in Soviet times, in my opinion, in the 1930s. This building was built in 1873, so there were 2 fires in this building. The first fire occurred in 1917, when the building burned out in the same way. Then the local population gathered money and restored this building. Literally, in 1 year, the entire building was restored. In the 1986, similarly, almost 70 years later, after 69 years, this building caught fire in a new way. It burned out just as well.
69 лет это здание загорелось по новой, выгорело точно так же.
In this form, the building has been for the last 33 years, and this despite the fact that it's officially an architectural monument. At first, the collapse of the Soviet Union prevented its restoration, then it passed from one private hands to the other. Although all this time talk about the restoration continued, now there is hope that the dreams of many residents of Semey will come true.
С 1986 года поменялось множество владельцев.
Since 1986, many owners have changed, and it seems that now it is planned that an investor will enter and this building will be completed, reconstructed, and developed, and will also be a favorite place of our residents.
Тоже излюбленным местом наших горожан.
One of the symbols of the city is the Moshevsky Gate, the only surviving part of the Semipalatinsk fortress, along with the lock from the gate, which is stored in the local history museum of Semey. The fortress, built in 1773, was surrounded by a high wooden wall with earthen ramparts and moats. For all the time of its existence, the structure was repeatedly rebuilt and strengthened. In 1803, the Moshevsky Gate was built according to the design of a military engineer, Captain Ivan Andreev. It was built well. After all, it was an object of military strategic importance. Walls 2 meters wide and 7 meters in length, width and height. The gates were made of mountain slabs, as well as burned bricks.
Было изначально в городе 3 ворот. Были Мышевские ворота, они вели.
Originally, there were 3 gates in the city. There were Moshevsky Gates, they led to Moshevsky Salt Lake. There were Uskamenogorsk Gates, they did not survive. And there were gates that went to the Irtysh. People call them Irtysh Gates. The whole trade route went through our city. As a matter of fact, maybe this was the fact that contributed to the city's intense development. Through our city passed Sergiopolsky Tract to China and to Central Asia.
На Среднюю Азию.
100 years ago, the fortress lost its military significance and the trade did not go so actively, but it was decided to preserve Moshevsky Gates as an architectural monument of the beginning of the 18th century. Not once did the Soviet authorities tear them down, but local historians managed to defend them. However, only for the time being. In 1970, the Moshevsky Gate became a hindrance in the construction of the tunnel for the access to the railway. These gates are now located not on the historical site. They were shifted because it was necessary to carry out the railway highway construction, and they moved it, and it can be said that now it is just a layout. Moshevsky Gates are notable for the fact that Fyodor Dostoevsky served there when he was in exile in Semipalatinsk in the middle of the 19th century. Structures associated with the name of the great writer, along with no less famous figures such as Abay Kunanbayev, Mukhtar Awezov, and Shakarim, became part of the heritage of the city. The involvement of these individuals in the development of Semey made these places truly unique.